I'm going to demonstrate how to make a Mitzi Ladybird, but I thought I'd start by showing what comes in the kit. So this is the kit, it's a midi kit. So if I just open the lid, there's an instruction booklet with step-by-step colour photographs taking you through how to make her. There are template sheets that are ready to cut. So there's 2 template sheets with lots of details on the templates as well. And then for the fabric, you get the eyes, black thread for the Ladybird smile. There's black wool felt, this is for the spots. Some black cotton fabric, which is for the antennae and the legs. Some beige cuddle soft fabric for the face. There's 2 lots of batting or wadding. There's a small piece for making the legs, and then there's a larger piece, and this is for stabilising the red fabric, which I'll demonstrate shortly. And then there's some black cuddle soft, can you see? Super soft, and red as well. So I'll move this out of the way, and I'll make a start. Now the first thing to look at, so I'll show you in the instructions, is how to make the antenna. So this is a piece from the black cotton. So it's a long cotton piece. We make them 1 piece and then cut it in 2 to make the antennae. So it's actually like this when you cut it out. So press it in half and then press each of the long sides into the fold in the centre and then fold it all over again. So it's actually now, can you see, sort of 4 layers of fabric thick, but then the raw edges are hidden in the inside. So if I show one end, so they're folded into the centre and then everything's folded over again. And then with a nice short stitch length, stitch down the length of the strip. I use about 1.8, 1.5 stitch length because you don't want those stitches to come undone. Also, I'm using white thread for this demo, but you'd want to use a coordinating thread so they're hidden. I'll sew this now. I'm just going to push with my stiletto just to get started. So there we go, I've sewn all the way down the length, and then I'm going to fold this in half and tie a knot in the end of each one. That's one. And then the other, and then trim them both so they're matching lengths. Trim them both to 8 centimetres. So I'll just use my guide on my sewing machine there. So I'm going to make a snip there, and then I'll make the other one the same length. There we go. So those are the 2 antenna strips done. And then I'll start with the face. I do feel the need as a demoer to say, when you cut, don't cut that way towards your hand. It's the TV demonstrator in me that can't stop. So don't do what I did. Make sure you're safe when you're using scissors. But then this is the face piece. And then this is the piece that goes on top of the face. And it's actually the deeper curve that joins the face. If you can see, it's sort of a deeper curve on one side. But you know that this side is the top of the head anyway, because I don't know if they show up, but there are little notches marked that show where each antenna go and where the centre point goes. So it's this side that I'm going to sew to the top of the face. So I'm just going to set my machine to a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the foot. reverse over the first few stitches, and then carry on. Just bring the curve around. It's a nice gentle curve, it's not too difficult to sew. So that's the top of the face sewn on, and then there's a dart here, which I'm just going to close by bringing the sides together, and I sew from the edge to the fold just to close that dart. To lift that up. Can you see there? I've just closed that dart, and that gives the face a little bit of roundness from the front. There we go. And now I'm going to base the antenna into position. And when you're putting the antenna on, if you can see the stitching, either have it together in the centre or both on the outside. I'm going to have them both together in the centre. So I'll base this one on first, and so I can see, the notch there. You could make little clips in the fabric to help, because it is difficult to see a notch on black fabric. I'm just going to have the edge of the antenna just slightly protruding the edge of the fabric, because I want to make sure there's a good seam allowance caught, because if some of the fabric frays on the edge and they're stitched in quite close to the edge, they can then just fray and come out. So it's just overlapping a little bit. And then I'm going to make some basting stitches inside. Can you hear a cat now knocking off all my threads from next to the machine? He'll no doubt make an appearance in a minute. So I'm going to just go backwards and forwards just to hold that in place. And that's where I want it to be. And because these stitches are inside the seam allowance, I don't have to remove them, and actually they add a little bit of extra security to hold that in place. So I've put that one on, so I'll do the same with the other one. So again, I just want it to overlap the edge, just to make sure I've really caught the end, enough of the end into that seam. And it's good at this point just to flip them out and make sure that they're in. Yeah, I think they're sort of centred. That looks good. So I'm happy to carry on. I'll just trim some of these threads. Oh, this cat is so desperate to make an appearance on this video. Right, this is the back head piece. And the easiest way I find to sew a front of a face to the back of the head is to start at the top centre. So I think actually I have made a little clip, can you see in this one, to indicate that centre notch. There's one either side to show where the antennae go, but that centre notch I'm going to match up with the centre notch in the face piece. There we go. And then I'm going to sew from this top point down along one side, and then when I'm happy with that, I'll flip it over and do the other side. But sewing sort of two shallower curves is easier than sewing all the way round in what then becomes one quite tight curve. It's easy to sort of get some stretching between the fabrics, and then it doesn't go on as evenly. So start on this side, make sure the antenna is not caught. So I'm going to sew over the end of the antenna. So that's one side of the face sewn on. And then I'm going to return to the top. Because I'm going the other way this time, it'll be the back head on top for sewing, but that's fine. And I'm going to sew from here and do the other side. There we go. So that's that side sewn on as well. And then I'm going to turn it the right way out and just check that I'm happy with the overall shape. I think the antennae, you can tell sort of it with the centre dart that they're in a nice position. And then now, to make sure that they're really well secured in this seam and they're not going to get pulled out, I'll flip it back over and reinforce the seam here. So I'm stitch backwards and forwards a few times over this seam that joins them in, just to really make sure they're well anchored in place. So I'll do that now. And also, if you've left that little bit of extra antennae, you know exactly where they are then for this bit. So I went backwards and forwards a few times. They're really well secured in that seam now. And the last job for the face before I put it to one side is I'm going to fit the eyes in. So always remember to mark the position of the eyes before you start, because it's much easier to do it at that point than if they're not on now. Try and work out where they go from the template when the dart's been put in and things. It is possible, but it's not ideal. So try and make sure they're in before you get going. So here's one mark. So I'm going to make the smallest hole possible. And if you need to make it a little bit bigger with a few more snips, do that. Don't go straight in with a big snip for the eyes. And I think I put my eyes in here for when I was ready. So ideally you want the sort of size of hole where you do have to sort of push the eye through just to make it a little bit bigger, so it fits really snugly. Now for some fabrics, and especially if you're adding toys into maybe a crocheted item where the holes can become bigger, it's a good idea with thinner fabrics and that sort of thing to add a square of felt or batting over the eye. So cut a square that's slightly bigger overall than the back of the eye. Make a little hole in the centre and put that over, so that when you fit the eye over the top, there's more for the back of the eye, over the top, there's more for it to grab onto. But because this fabric is quite thick anyway, it's okay just to go straight on with the back. I give that a good press and just make sure when I turn it this way, I can't really get my fingernails under the eye. There we go. So that one's in place. And then I'll do the same with the other one. So again, smallest hole possible. And then fit the eye through. There we go. And I'll put the back on. Make sure it's all nice and smooth. And then, there we go. It's all the way now. So that's the head done. So that's nice and straightforward. So I'll just pop this to one side and then move on to the body. I'll try to clear some of this mess as well. Now, the first thing to start before assembling the body is, let me see, there's a piece of batting or wadding that's in the kit. And with the red fabric, all the red parts of the Ladybird, if I show it on this one, they all have spots on. So it's 1, 2, 3 pieces, and they all have spots on. And when you applique the felt spots on and sew them in place, that stops this fabric, which has some stretch to it. It stops it from stretching in that area. And so you'll have some bits that stretch and then some bits that don't. And so to even out the finish, I stabilise all these pieces on this larger piece of batting. I don't know how well it shows up actually with this white background. But put each of the back pieces, and then there's a lower stomach piece as well. Put that one there. Pop that like that. So they've all got their own space on the batting, and then with a long stitch, just sew all around the outside edge, inside the seam allowance, so you don't have to remove those stitches later when the toy's made. So maybe 1/8 of an inch, a really, really scant 1/4 inch all the way around to fix these pieces onto this batting fabric, and then it acts as a stabilizer and it evens out. This then won't stretch too much around the spots. And also, when you're appliquing the spots on, you've got a bigger piece to work with. So instead of, this one's quite small in places, trying to sew a spot onto that and it being a little bit fiddly, you've got a larger piece overall to work with, which I think manoeuvring it round and sewing the spots on becomes a bit easier when they're all on this backing piece. So I'll move this and show what I mean. So these ones have all been, if you can see, I used blue thread in the hope it would show up. So I've sewn around all of them to fix them in place on the batting and then added the spots. So if I just go back to the other one and put these pieces back on. So fix them in place, sew them with a long stitch length all around the outside, and then you can place the spots on and sew the spots on one by one. I'll sew with a wide stitch. I'll sew one of these on then so I can demonstrate on this, so I cover everything. I don't want to leave anything out. The machine's become unthreaded. Okay. So I'll up the stitch length to 5, nice and wide. And you don't have to be neat with these stitches. If you do sort of drop off the edge, it doesn't really matter. It's just to hold the fabric to the batting. There we go. So I fixed that one on, and imagine I've then done the same for the other 2 pieces. And then when you come to put the spots on, if I can find the template, if I show on these template sheets, oh, I've not got the other one, it gives an indication on the templates where to place the spots. So if I open that out, can you see anywhere in that sort of area for each of the spots, and anywhere sort of on this lower stomach piece, anywhere for the 2 spots within this sort of area. If it slips out slightly, it's not a huge problem. It's just as long as it doesn't overlap the seam allowance, so you lose a bit of the spot into the seam. Ideally, that's what you'd like to avoid. I have somewhere, I'll just grab it a moment, bear with. I cut the areas out of the template so that when I've placed the spot on, I can just check, or maybe move it more there. I can check that it's in the area I want it to be in. So you can pin the spot in place, and then I'll drop down to a normal stitch length. I've gone for 2.2, and then just sew around the outside edge, well, the inside edge of the spot, a couple of millimetres on the inside. Again, I'm using white so it will show up, but if you use coordinating black thread, you don't have to be, it won't show if it's not the most perfect circular stitching possible. And when I'm doing this, I sew I go straight on. I don't reverse back over the first few stitches because I don't need to, because I'm going to come round and the last stitches will fix the first few in place, if that makes sense. Just take it nice and steady, a few stitches, and then pause with the needle down through the fabric and pivot round, just to make that as easy as possible. So I'm getting back to the first few stitches. So I'm going to sew over the first few, and then on my machine I've got a locking stitch, so I would just do that to finish these threads, or you can reverse back and forwards over the last few to secure them. So take that off. And then I would just feed this thread. In fact, because this is not super neat, this stitch here, I'd undo this one. And then thread a needle with this and just send the thread through to the other side. And then carry on and do that with all of the other pieces and spots. So I've fixed all those on. And then once they're done, just cut out each of these pieces. And if I can find my scissors. So you just want the backing now to be the same size, really, as the pieces, the body pieces. I'm going to do this as quickly as possible, so it won't be super neat, but try and be neater than I'm being. If that, that's one. There we go. And then the body, once the sort of the preparation of the pieces is done, the body goes together really, really quickly. But it's nice, the backing of the batting, the wadding behind the fabric just gives it a nice even finish and a nice sort of softness. It makes stuffing it a little bit easier, actually, because it finds the shape and rounds out really nicely. Let's just cut this one out quickly. There we go. So, oh, best take the dart out. There we go. So those are all the back body pieces. And because now this covers the back of the fabric, you might want to transfer the notch markings. When I put notches in things, I actually, can you see, I invert the notches so that I can just use my water erasable pen just to make marks. I've got it here. Oh, I've not got my pen to hand, but I would make those marks there like that and use the cut out bits to help do that. Sometimes people like to cut out the extra bit of fabric, the little pointy notch, but I just find that a bit fiddly, so I tend to invert them on the templates and then just mark them with a pen. Right, so I'll complete the stomach piece, because if I go back to the original Ladybird, the chest piece, the upper bit's black, and then this lower piece is the red spotty section. So this is quite a curve here, and you could, if you wanted, to line up the centre notches and sew a side at a time, so it definitely goes on straight, or you can sew all the way round in one go, which is what I'm going to do for speed. And I don't know why, but my machine has become unthreaded again. And now my thread, there we go. Right, so I'm going to sew from side to side and just take it nice and slowly, because the lower piece won't stretch as much now because it has that batting behind. So just sew a little bit and bring the fabric around the curve and just make sure it's on track. There we go. So that's the stomach piece. I'll just trim the extra thread off there. So that's the stomach piece ready to go. I'll just check with my instruction booklet that I am doing it in the correct order. Right, so I've made the stomach piece, I've got the 2 back pieces, and I'm going to make the legs now because I need to baste those into position. And similarly to Ambrose Bee, the legs and the antennae are the same for both Ambrose Bee and Mitzi Ladybird. And the way they are done, in the kit is a small piece of batting, and then you need to cut out 8 of these pieces and place them, put 2 together, one on top of the other, and then place both on top of the batting to one corner. So if you see there, I've got 2 pieces on top of the batting, and I'm going to sew around the edge. So I'm going to go through all 3 layers. And this means that when I cut them out and turn them the right way up, there's filling on the inside already. There we go. So sew them on like that, and I've gone on and done the other 4 here, so that when they're all stitched on through all layers, move this one, as before, cut them out of the batting. So I'm going to cut the batting so that it matches, it doesn't have to be perfect, it matches the same size and shape of the black cotton fabric. So once you've cut one out, make a small V-shaped notch in the seam allowance at the centre, on one side, and then the other side. And this just removes some of the bulk. And then it's a little bit fiddly, but if you can open the leg up and then turn it the right way out. I'm just going to put my finger inside just to round out the seam. And then if you've got a little tool of some description just to help turn that out. I like a small screwdriver. It's a Phillips one, so it's got more of a rounded edge, so it's not going to go through the stitching. So there we go. Turn the leg the correct way out, and then you can give it a little press. And then if you want, baste the top edge closed just to keep the raw edges level and make it easier to work with. So I'm going to just pause for a minute, and then I'll come back with all the legs ready to go. Okay, all my legs are here, and then just to neaten up the edge, I'm just going to trim them just so they're nice and neat and easier to work with. Just take those dog ears off. Okay, so those are the 4 legs. Just clear some of that mess. And then the next step, if I refer back to the booklet, so we've made the legs and then baste them in place on the stomach piece. So the stomach piece is completed here. And then baste the legs in each of the, there we go, can we see? Each of the places. If I have the templates again, the leg falls between this notch and this seam, and then down at the bottom here on the lower stomach piece. So everything's marked on, so you, that's why it's a good idea to transfer the markings over. So I'll pop this one in here. I'll sew the top, I'll baste the top 2 on first, and then I'll do the lower 2. So those are the top 2 legs in place, and then the lower 2. Oh, can I make out my notches? I can. They've not transferred very well onto the, but if I just peel it back, I can see where they're supposed to be. There we go. So I'll base these in place. Okay. So I'm going to just trim away these longer threads. With this one, I've taken quite a deep, the basting stitches are well within the seam allowance, so I may well have to take those out later if they're still visible. But at the moment, they're just there to hold the legs in place while I sew the back body on. And then there's a dart to give the back pieces more shape. There's a dart in either side. So fold over and close the dart in either side. Okay, that's one. And then again, I'm going to refer back to the booklet because can you tell I'm so worried about doing something out of order. So there we go, close the dart, and now I'm going to sew a side at a time onto the stomach piece. So I'll start on this side and I'm going to sew from this top edge around, sandwich the legs in place, and then there's a centre, well, I might move the notch again. In fact, I might clip the seam allowance just so I really know where I'm finishing. It's there, I think, but I'm going to fold it over just to make sure I'm definitely looking at the correct. Yep, it's there. So I want to know that I'm finishing the body in the correct place, and you want to sew this down. So it's the side with the dart. So sew this down, and then when you get to the bottom and finish the seam, you want the seam allowance left over on this piece. So I'll show you what I mean now by doing that. So that now, because of the batting, this is quite a chunky piece to sew through, but it's all quite soft at the same time, so it's not really difficult to get through the machine. It's not like denim or anything like that. But just take it nice and slowly. So I can see the little clip that indicates the bottom centre of the Ladybird. So I'm just going to reverse over those stitches. So I've finished in the centre, but there's still that little bit of fabric, can you see, left over there, so that when we come to close later, we've got the seam allowance still there. So if I turn this, you can see the body's really starting to come together now. So I'll do the same on the other side. So just nice and steady. I often, when I come to a seam, will finger press it open. It's not imperative that you do that. It's just a habit I've got into. And if when I get to it, it pushes the fabric over a little bit, so it folds to one side, I don't worry too much. But if you've seen me sort of finger pressing seams open, it's more of a habit. And it is good practice, but it's not that important. Because it's quite thick fabric, a little bit of chunk in the seams doesn't really matter. There we go, so I've finished in the centre again. So if I open that out, the body is now together, and I'm going to sew the head around this opening. And because, if I bring the head back, there's this dart in the back of the head, so flip it the wrong way, it can be opened right out, so it makes sewing the head to the body easier. And if you want, again, you can line up the centre notch in the chest with the dart in the middle of the head and sew from the centre out each time. So that way you know the centre's matched up, so the head's going to be on straight. Or you can sew from side to side because the seams will line up, which helps, you know, let you know that you're on track. I'm going to use my stiletto just to smooth that fabric down. And if you wanted with this as well, you could sew first time with a longer stitch length just to make sure you're happy with the position of the head, and then go back over it with a normal sort of shorter stitch length. So I can feel there that the seams are lining up. So I just want to make sure that everything's lined flat and the edge of the fabric hasn't curled. And I'll sew into the centre, pause at the dart and just rearrange. And again, I want these seams to line up. And because the fabric has a little bit of stretch, you can always sort of pull it into position a little bit more as well. There we go. And then just check you've taken the full seam allowance, because you don't want any short bits that might sort of pull apart and come into a hole. There you can see the ladybird's head is attached on. And then turn it the wrong way out again, and make sure when we're sewing the back of the head closed that these antennae don't get caught. So just push them into the face, because it will be a fiddly bit of unpicking trying to get them out of the seam. And so this is the last page of the booklet now, and the last job is to close the body from the top of the dart down, and then finish to leave an opening in the bottom of the body so that we can turn the ladybird the right way out. So I'm just going to line up these seams and know that the dart is folding in the correct place. And if you wanted, you could sew, you might find it a little bit easier to come from this side up and finish on the end of the dart. So if I line those side pieces up and think I want about maybe a little bit more of that size opening, so I'm going to sew from here up and finish at the top of the dart. Pause here with the needle down through the seam and just pivot a little bit, because there is a shape, it rounds out again for the back of the head. There we go. So then there's just this little hole in the back of the body, and turn the ladybird the right way out and ease it out carefully. I'm being a bit rough with this, so I don't want to spend too much time on the video, but there we go. So we've got the ladybird ready to stuff. See the little spotty back, ready to stuff and ready to embroider a face on and all of that. So I might do a little video just showing how I do the smile later, but that's how to sew the main part of the ladybird.